Welcome to A Walk in the Garden. I'm Liz Davey, and this show is on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable. It's a series of episodes that are done in my garden and also in my kitchen, where we cook some seasonal produce into meals for our family. Today I'm starting again in the herb garden, but there isn't too much left out here. We have a few more things that we can harvest, but for the most part our dry weather has really taken a toll. We can get enough to get a teaspoon or a tablespoon of most of the herbs, but it'll soon be time to start cutting them back. I'll leave many of the semi-tender herbs right here, and we won't cut back the sage at all. We'll be able to continue harvesting sage and thyme right up until Thanksgiving, if we don't have snow by then. The tarragon will get cut down. Again, I'll leave the Santolina. The oregano also will get cut back. I often leave the late oak leaves on the herb garden as kind of protection from the cold, so that the things that are a little higher in this raised bed won't freeze too badly in the root area. All the mints will be cut down, and the chives will just die down by themselves. Any annual herbs like the lemon verbena that are left after a frost, there will be nothing left because it goes first in the frost. We can pick that now, but once frost is over, that can be dug up, as well as the scented geraniums. It's also time to start picking up things that are in the garden, like the plant tags, and storing them away for the winter. It won't be long before this whole area is completely covered in leaves, so you want to get out the things that are in your garden that you store for the winter and put them away before the leaves cover them up and they're hard to find. Now let's move over to the perennial garden. We still have a few blooms in the perennial garden, but it's very dry. We're expecting rain this weekend, which is why we have a little wind coming in today. I think tonight we will get some showers and then a heavier rain tomorrow. But we still have some blooms in the perennial garden to add color. This is a Eupatorium chocolate. It has kind of a chocolate foliage. Foliage is very dry on this one, but the blooms, the white blooms, are out and attracting pollinators. The butterfly bushes are pretty much finished, as is the Boltonia in back, which was more of an aster-looking plant. It looks like a tall aster, but it's actually a plant called Boltonia. The asters are indeed still blooming, and they're really quite nice this year. Evidently, they have liked this dry weather. And they're covered with honeybees, which is a welcome thing. Honeybees have been in pretty short supply in this area, and we have a good crop of them here. Someone will probably reap the benefits of that by getting some honey in their hives this fall. But they are just covered with various pollinators, which are very helpful to attract to your gardens. A few late blooms on the lavender. Just the blooms will be cut before fall on that one, and then we'll finish with it, cutting it back if necessary in the spring. The knockout roses are still blooming nicely. In fact, these are some of the nicer times for the knockout roses because the pests are all gone and the roses are continuing to set blooms. I do not deadhead them now. I've stopped doing that, maybe 2 weeks ago. We want them to set rose hips if they are going to do so. Some roses do, some do not. But that tells the rose that it's time to get ready for winter. And we want it to harden off and be ready when the cold temperatures come. We have chrysanthemums still in bloom, at least those that were planted several years ago and kept over. They've been able to form deep roots. if you've planted chrysanthemums now, be sure to water them during the dry times or they will dry up pretty much completely and very quickly. They need water almost every day if you have them on around your front door or anything like that and still in pots, or even if you've just planted them in the ground. Anything that you plant now will need lots of water before the ground freezes in order to set down good roots so that it'll come back next year. I prefer generally to plant things in the spring when we tend to have more dependable moisture. The pineapple lily will soon have its blooms cut off. We'll just snap those off or out. And then this will die back and it will be completely gone, and I will bring it inside for the winter. I keep it in a cool bedroom and then bring it out again in the spring, and it produces new foliage and hopefully new blooms. Again, more asters. These are the purple dome asters. They're not as tall as some of the tall asters because I have a fairly narrow garden. I prefer them to the real tall ones. The pineapple sage will go with the first frost, as will the salvia black and blue. It's been nice now, but it will go. This potted plant has completely dried up. It's ready for the compost, and we'll put that in the compost very soon. A rose that I transplanted earlier is just putting out a little bloom now, but it's looking pretty healthy. I think it will do well next year and probably be up about here. Butterfly bush is still blooming, but I haven't seen too many butterflies. Their season is drawing to a close, as is the hummingbird season. The hummingbirds migrate fairly early, so what I'll do is upend this, take it inside, wash it well, probably in the dishwasher, and store it away for the winter. It doesn't need to be out after this time. We haven't seen any hummingbirds here for the last couple weeks, so I'm presuming they have all migrated. I can't remember whether it's male or female hummingbirds that migrate earlier, but one or the other migrates before their spouses, and then they join them a little later. This is a planter, and again, it's almost ready to go. If you save geraniums, now's the time to do so. This is a lemongrass, and I will be coming out and digging that one up and getting it ready to move inside, if I have sufficient space. The pineapple sage, unfortunately, will just go. It will, hopefully, if we have a late frost, we may get some red blooms from that one. Now it's time to go into the vegetable garden. We still have plenty to harvest in the vegetable garden. Our late crop of beans is now producing, and I'm able to pick a meal of beans every once in a while. I like to get them when they're young and tender. And we also have baby kale. I'm going to use that today in a salad. The calendulas are still blooming, and they will bloom even though we have a slight frost. Parsley will still be good after frost. In fact, the parsley will be good maybe all the way to Thanksgiving. We can continue to pick parsley. This is a plant called Sweet Annie, and Sweet Annie is a very fragrant plant. It's often used as a room deodorizer, and it's ready to pick now. I will just be cutting that one off, and I can use it in indoor arrangements. It will dry very nicely, and we'll just cut it off. I didn't plant seeds of Sweet Annie this year, but it's one of those things that once you have it, if you let it continue to grow, you'll always have Sweet Annie. It just continues to come up here and there. I pull most of it out, but I do leave one or two so that I have a nice, at least one nice plant, so that I have it to put in a front entry or another area. It's very fragrant, and it's often called the Amish room deodorizer. They use it as a room deodorizer. The other thing I need to harvest now are the squash. The vines are pretty much gone, and I have quite a few acorn squash, which I'll just be putting in a basket. These I'll put out in a dry place, and then we can let them harden off, and they'll last quite a long time. I've got quite a few of these. They're not big, but each one will nicely provide a meal for a couple people. And we have a few more in amongst the calendulas. The nasturtiums will completely disappear. We'll know we have a frost when I come out and the nasturtiums are flat on the ground. They're cheerful right now. They make nice bouquets. They're an edible flower. You can add the blossoms to salads if you want. You can stuff the blossoms. Kind of an interesting plant. But they are very colorful. I've been picking the zinnias regularly. They're doing really well right now. These I planted all the flowers from seed, and these make nice bouquets. You'll see one when we go inside. And you always should remove the leaves of flowers that would be in the water. That will help them last a lot longer in the house. We also have some lettuce. This is the dark Merlot lettuce. And of course, we have arugula over here. And a little bit of cilantro still from a late planting. So we can still continue to enjoy that. It will soon be gone. And I do not like to buy herbs that much in the winter, so I enjoy them while I have them. And then we do without until they come on again. The arugula will continue again past frost. I pick the tender leaves for salads. Our strawberries will get covered with straw. I'm keeping them weeded out so that we can continue. Parsnips won't be ready until later. They like a frost, as does the kale and the pericicaba or broccoli. The carrots will last through frost, as will the beets. We have quite a few beets that we can harvest, both the dark red kind and also the golden beets. Some of those over here. These are smaller ones. And I had a mixed package, so that includes some pink ones and some yellow ones and a variety of beets. It's very hard to find the golden beets in the market, and they're the sweetest ones, so we really like to have those so we can harvest them a little later. Add that to my basket, and then we're going to move over to the other side of the garden. It's time to start thinking about hardy or non-hardy bulbs in the garden. The dahlias I will just continue to let bloom, and once it frosts and the foliage dies back, we can dig those, probably later in October. Right now I have several amaryllis that I moved out for the summer, and I'm digging that, and roots and all, and I'm going to replant it into a pot and put it in my shed and let the foliage die down. I'll keep it completely dry at this point. About December, I will start watering it, and hopefully at that point it will have enough built up energy to produce at least some foliage and possibly a few blooms. Some of them are a little larger than others. This is a rather small one. I do get new amaryllis sometimes every year, but I like to keep the old ones, and I'm surprised that they do rebloom if you put them out in the summer. This year it's been so dry that I might not get blooms. We'll just have to wait and see. I also have planted broom corn this year. It looks like corn, but it has a seedy tassel on the top. And once the seeds fall off, they can use what's left to make a broom, though I don't do that. I use them as fall decoration, and they make very nice floral arrangements to cut and put in a container. So it's more decorative for me than useful, but I do like it. I still have a few dry beans to harvest. We did most of them last time, but I have more to come out and pick. These are the leopard beans or tiger beans. They're striped, striped mottled bean. And again, they will be dried and they can be cooked up from the dry state as we move into the season. We still have a few tomatoes left on the vines down at the other end of the garden, but the cucumbers, I would say, are pretty much gone. So at some point I can just cut the strings that held them up or pull them off, and we'll just remove the whole thing, strings and all. And if I do this and don't separate out the vines, I will put it in the trash rather than the compost. Sometimes the string is biodegradable and sometimes it's not. If it's 100% cotton, you can put it right in the compost and it will also compost. But we'll just be removing this whole structure and getting it out of the garden very soon. There's a couple small cucumbers left, but the majority of them have been picked, and what's left isn't that good. I have celery that can be harvested, and I am harvesting it. It will not survive the frost, so I need to get it out and into my refrigerator before we do have a frost. Right now there's not one threatened, but we know that by the end of October we probably will have colder weather. Most of the squash, summer squash, has been removed. The vines went, it was no longer producing, just doesn't have a long enough day anymore. But it is time, where I've had beans before, I dug an area to plant garlic. This is the garlic that we harvested about 2 months ago, and I'm going to separate it into cloves and plant them about 8 inches apart and about 2 or 3 inches deep. This will be next year's garlic. And you want to plant it with the root side down. That would be the bottom part. I saved some of the nicer cloves to do this. I try to move it around in the garden each year so that it's in a different spot. That helps with any pests that might be around. You want to mark this really well so the guy with the rototiller doesn't come in and rototill it. This will probably start to grow now. This stem end you just discard, but this will grow. We'll cover it up well. Some of the rocks out. And I want to add fertilizer to it. I'll continue planting the cloves. I'll add a little fertilizer because it is rather hungry, and most of the nutrients were used by the beans that were here before. So we'll put a little fertilizer on it, possibly some compost as well, and then I'll cover it with straw. It will come up this fall, generally, and have green shoots. But don't worry about it. They can live right through the frost. They'll probably die back in the winter and come up again next spring. Grow next summer, and we'll be harvesting it in July or August of next year. I still have a few peppers left. They, along with any eggplant, again, will be the first to go when it frosts. Had a variety of peppers this year, and we'll try to keep those picked. Certainly, if frost is threatening, I'll be out here picking anything that's left that might be killed by the frost. That also includes the tomatoes. Most of our larger tomatoes are finished, and the yellow tomatoes definitely are finished. But I still have plenty of cherry tomatoes, and we've been using those regularly, and we'll continue to do so until, again, the frost takes them. And none of the tomatoes survive a hard frost. They all wither, and the tomatoes become mushy, and they're ready for the compost at that point. Now let's move into another area for a plant that I'd like to share with you. This is a little area near my driveway where I have a rose, also some asters, hydrangea, some sedum, lavender, and iris. Also, I've planted in here, in addition to spring bulbs, I planted an autumn crocus. And this is the autumn crocus in full bloom. You plant them in about August, and you will have bloom then in every year. The foliage comes up in the spring, but there's no flower in the spring, just a lot of foliage. And then it dies back, and you think, well, it's gone. But then come September, with no foliage at all, up comes the bloom. The autumn crocuses are different colors, different shapes, and different prices. More expensive than the spring flowering crocus, which is why I only have one at this point. But they are a nice addition to the fall garden. This one is spread a little bit. I've got 2 or 3 here now where I only had one before. So I'm hoping it continues to spread. And I would like to get a few more of them because they are so nice in the fall garden and a very unexpected bloom. They're very much related to the saffron crocus, which also is a fall blooming crocus, and you can harvest your own saffron if you're so inclined, which is in the center of the flower. You see the little yellow on this one. It's bright red on the saffron crocus, and you can harvest it. I had some of those. I'm not sure if they will bloom. They have not at this point. Unfortunately, the chipmunks also like saffron crocus, and they may have consumed all of them. So we may not have any of those. Now let's go back by the garden shed and the pond. The leaves are starting to fall, and so I've removed the water plants from the pond, getting them ready to go inside for the winter. I will continue to leave my waterfall running, and I want to put my pond thermometer back into the pond. I used it in the spring, and I'll use it again now. Once the temperature drops below 50, the fish become pretty much inactive, and you can stop feeding them. Until then, I'll be using a cooler water food. This is often called fall or spring feed, and we'll use that with the fish from now until we stop feeding them. The fish kind of go dormant in the winter, so we don't need to continue feeding them once the temperature gets low enough in the pond. Also, we've been collecting a lot of leaves in the filtration, in the skimmer. So it's time to net the pond. I had a sprinkler. I'm going to come in front of the camera a little bit. My sprinkler, one of them broke. And you're not supposed to use a sprinkler in Norfolk anyway, but I kept the base of it, and I use that to support the net that I put over the pond. If you put it on flat, the leaves tend to collect and fall in the water. So supporting it a little bit seems to help. I have a large net that I will unroll here and start putting on. I probably won't finish it until a little later, but you can get the idea. Untwist it here and start pulling it over. I cover the whole pond with it. I will be able to reach in to clean the skimmer and feed the fish. I can actually drop the fish food in right over the edge. And I'll probably get some in the water right now, but again, I want to bring it right over the top. And I'll be fastening it down with some of the rocks around the edge. The idea is to keep as many leaves out as I can, and then I can blow off with my blower any leaves that fall on the pond. And it really does help. Just have to make sure I have it not caught on this frame. I'll pull it across and out of the water and support it. Bring it over and again tuck it under the rocks. We're expecting a major rain and windstorm, and I know that that means a lot of leaves, and if we can keep them out of the bottom of the pond, it will really help in our cleanup efforts next spring, and also keep the water clear this fall. So you get the idea. We'll continue putting the rest of the net over. taking it out of the water and finding the edge and bringing it up this way. And I can cover the whole pond and some of the plants alongside. The idea is to keep it out of the water as much as possible. Once the really colder weather settles in, I will be taking the filtration equipment out and storing it away for the winter. I'll bring this up and again put rocks on it. So the next time we're together, you'll probably see this completely fastened down and out of the water. Sometimes I roll it under a bit just to neaten it up. And again, the rocks help. Fastening it down, and I'll put rocks along the edge as well. Inside the shed, it's time to take inside things that mice might eat. I use the Lovely Mouse Magic in here to discourage mice. They don't like the mint that's in this. It's a safe product and it works quite well in the shed, but I don't tempt fate. I do take out anything that I think might be really attractive to mice, like my cushions. Also, I would not store bulbs or anything like that in here for the long haul. Temporarily, I can put something like that in, but not for the long time of the winter. I have put some of the more pungent herbs in, and again, that will help keep mice and also some of the insects out of here for the winter. This will get a complete cleaning before winter really sets in, because I have to store my porch furniture in there. And we do a lot of moving around so that everything fits. Now, let's go up to the back deck. I'm fortunate to have a sunroom so that I can take in many plants for the winter. I do tend to fill it up maybe a little too much. I always lose a few throughout the winter, so it loosens up as the winter goes on, so I have room for spring things too. This is a bougainvillea. It needs to be cut back before it comes in. But I'm also going to be spraying everything with a product called neem. It's a natural insecticide made from a plant. And I want to make sure that everything that comes in gets sprayed. These are my pond plants. They will be in dish pans or basins all winter, which I'll keep filled with water. And hopefully they will stay alive. They will not be lush like this for very long, unfortunately. But if I can keep them alive, they will come back in the winter, as will the grass that was in the pond. A begonia should also come back, and that will probably need to be repotted because there are other things in this pot that I might want to bring in. I have lavenders, and I have rosemary. Again, everything that I want to bring in is going to get sprayed before I bring it in, and probably twice if the weather holds. We'll just make sure that everything doesn't bring in any hitchhikers. And that will help go a long way towards keeping the plants healthy in the winter. The same is true of the cuttings that I did. They'll be repotted out in the garden shed, left out there for a little while. The garden shed will survive a light frost, but not a very heavy one. So I'll need to bring those in before the end of October. But I want to make sure this plant gets a good set of spray. And right now it's covered with blooms. These blooms will not last, unfortunately. It will be kind of dormant until spring, and then it will get another flush of bloom. But right now it's very pretty and really gives a tropical feel to the patio. Again, I've got more plants over here. I won't be bringing in my hanging baskets. They'll just go in the shed. But all the other plants will get a good dose of spray and come on in. So about the next time that we visit again here, these will all be inside the sunroom instead of outside of it. They're staged right here by the door so that if frost threatens within the next few days, which I don't believe it will, but they can go in very quickly by getting them all together. It also gives me a chance to decide what I want to keep and what I just don't have room to keep. So I can bring in just those things I want to keep. I keep only the ones that are, one, large plants that would take a long time to grow, and also plants that are more expensive or hard to find. Things like impatiens and most geraniums do not come in because they're easily replaceable and they're fairly inexpensive. I have my saucers also cleaned and ready to go. Each plant will need a saucer when it's brought inside so that water doesn't get all over the floor when you water the plant. Watering needs cut down when they're brought inside. They go a little dormant over the winter. Keeping them alive is my goal, and some of them do quite well. Others will lag and be discarded before the winter's over. It's just the way it always goes, and I expect it to do that again this year. Each year I keep a few more alive, and they prosper. This I have had for over 20 years, and it's come in every winter. I've repotted it several times. This is its last pot because I can't move a bigger one. So in order to keep it, I have to prune it back a bit so that it doesn't overgrow its roots. Now let's go inside and do some cooking with a seasonal product, apples. The first thing I'm going to make today is an apple cake. We're going to work with apples today in several ways with some of the seasonal produce that we grow. I don't have apples, though I did find an apple tree on my property that had a few apples. They weren't that good this year, but I think if I prune the tree a little bit, in future years I might just have some heirloom apples. The area around my house, according to some of the old-timers, was once an orchard, and I suspect this tree may be a survivor of that time because it doesn't taste like any current apple that I know. They're very sweet, they have a mottled skin, and I think it'll be kind of interesting to see if I can rehab the tree and get a harvest next year. So stay tuned and we'll see what happens. Right now I'm using apples that I got at a local farm stand, and I try to get an all-purpose apple because there's only 2 of us in this household. We like to eat apples as well as use them for cooking. So an all-purpose apple tends to work out better than one that's specifically for eating or one that's specifically for cooking. I'm going to start with 3 cups of flour. Add 2 cups of sugar. And then we're going to add some spices. A tablespoon of cinnamon. This is really a spicy apple cake. And I must say that my grandchildren, I made one last week, and my grandchildren knew I was going to be making one today and asked that if I had any left over by any chance, I would certainly not waste it and I could bring it to them. We're going to add a teaspoon of baking soda. We're using baking soda instead of baking powder because of the acidity of the apples. Anytime you have an acid ingredient, you often use some baking soda. We're going to add a teaspoon of allspice, a teaspoon of nutmeg, and a half teaspoon of cloves. Generally, when you're spicing something, you tend to use about half as much cloves as the other spices because they're a little more pronounced in flavor. Also a half teaspoon of salt. Now I have 1 cup of cooking oil, and I'm going to add 2 eggs. And 1 teaspoon of vanilla. I'm going to mix this all with a fork. And I'll add it in with the flour, sugar, and spices. And mix it with the mixer until just it's combined. For a cake mixture, this looks really lumpy and dry at this time. And that's just what it's supposed to look like. Hold it up here. It is very lumpy and dry. I'm going to add 3 cups of chopped, washed and cored apples. And this will give it the moisture. This turns out to be a very moist cake, believe it or not. And I'm going to add a cup of walnuts. You can leave the walnuts out if you don't like them. You could also add raisins instead if you prefer those. I'm going to mix this around. Let's put the mixer back that way. Again, it looks really dry and crumbly at this point. And I'm going to put it into an ungreased 13 by 9 pan. And again, it's very crumbly. And I'm going to press it down as I go. I've preheated my oven to 325 degrees, and I'm going to put this in, and it will bake for about 50 minutes, 50 to 55 minutes. I'll set my timer for 50. The magic happens in the oven. So the timer is set on that, and it's going to bake up into a nice moist cake. The next thing I'm going to do is make a stuffed pork chop. And I'm going to make the stuffing that includes apples. And the first thing that I did was to cook a piece of bacon. I'm making just 1 pork chop. If you want to make 2 or 4, you would double or quadruple the recipe. So I'm heating up right now the leftover bacon fat. And into that we're going to put 2 tablespoons of onion that's been chopped, and I use some of the scallions from the garden. I also have the celery in the garden, and I use 2 tablespoons of that. I'm also going to add a 1/4 cup of apple that's been chopped. Did a lot of chopping this morning. And we're going to saute that until the apples are somewhat cooked. This has been sauteed now, and we need to add a few other things. I'm going to add in the bacon that I had cooked in the bacon fat. And some salt and pepper, just a little bit. A few shakes of pepper. Again, if I were making a larger recipe, I'd use more of the seasoning. And I want to add some breadcrumbs. The original recipe called for cornbread stuffing mix. I'm using panko crumbs instead. And because they are not seasoned, I used the salt and pepper, perhaps a little more. And also I'm going to add some chopped sage. to give it a little extra flavor. And then a couple tablespoons of chicken broth just to thicken it up and coat those crumbs. We want something with a stuffing consistency for the pork chop. There's so many different pork chop stuffing recipes. You could use a different one every time you made pork chops. But this one is kind of a fall favorite. There are a variety of stuffings, and I think we could use a little bit more of the chicken broth, perhaps the rest of it. It does depend on what you use. And the next thing we need to do is get out our pork chop. And this is a boneless one. You can use ones with bones or boneless. And I'm going to use a boning knife to cut a pocket in the fatty edge of the pork chop. So I'll have a place for the stuffing. You can fasten these shut if you wish, but I'm just going to put it in an oven-safe dish that's been sprayed with cooking spray, and just add the stuffing right into the middle. I'm going to leave it open so we can have it out for display. But when I go to cook it a little later this afternoon, what I'll do is cover the whole pan with a piece of foil, and then I'll put it in the 325 oven for about 45 minutes. Then I will take the foil off and cook it for another 20 to 30 minutes to brown up on top. So that's our apple stuffed pork chop. Now, to go with that, and I do need to wash well here because I've handled raw meat. Also, we would not ever use the same cutting board that we used with raw meat until it has been thoroughly washed and sterilized. So those will all go in to be washed. Back to the stove, I'm going to melt about a tablespoon of butter. I'm making a baby kale salad to go with the pork chop and the apple cake. Let's see this one. The salad is, can be served warm. It's nice warm or at room temperature. And the frying pan with the butter, I'm going to add brown sugar, 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, a tiny bit of nutmeg, a tiny bit of cayenne pepper, and about a teaspoon of chopped fresh ginger. To that, we'll add an apple that's been peeled and chopped. And I'll mix that around, and we're going to cook this until the apples are cooked and a little caramelized in the sugar. Turn it down a little bit. We want them caramelized but not burned. The next thing I'll do is make a dressing. I have a 1/4 cup of olive oil. I'll add a tablespoon of lemon and a bit of lemon zest, some salt and pepper, and a teaspoon. I guess I want the lid on so I can squeeze it out. Oops. About a teaspoon and a half of a grainy brown mustard. You could use a whisk. I tend to use a jar and just shake it around. So this is a very mustardy vinaigrette, mustard and lemon. I'll add that to the kale, about 4 cups of kale. Toss it around so that we coat the kale with the vinaigrette. We'll check on the apples. They're coming along. Not quite ready yet. Starting to smell them, however. They smell really good. Kale is a more pronounced flavor green, and so you really need more substantial flavors with it rather than very delicate vinaigrettes. You need something that's a little more bold to temper the flavor of the kale. If they're about ready, I'm going to add the hot apples into the kale. And also a couple tablespoons of blue cheese and some toasted walnuts. And we can toss that together with a warm kale and apple salad. It's nice served warm, but I have had it leftovers, and it tastes just as good when it's left over too. So we'll serve that with the pork chop. Also to go with this meal, some of the green beans from the garden, steamed, and our apple cake. For dessert, and I will put a little powdered sugar on that before serving it. We could also use some ice cream, would be very nice on it, or some whipped cream, or custard sauce. As we close, I'd like to show you the lemon verbena liqueur. We started this, I think we worked on it for 2 different shows prior to today. The first thing we did was to soak our lemon peel and lemon verbena leaves in a quart of vodka, and that lasted for 2 weeks. Then we added 2 cups of sugar and let it, after we strained out the lemon verbena, and let it sit for another 2 weeks. I've strained it again, and I've bottled it now into a decorative bottle, and this is the lemon verbena liqueur. It's not something you would want to drink a lot of at once. It has a lemon flavor, but it is very sweet, and it is a liqueur. I think it might be good brushed on cake layers, certainly as an after-dinner drink, and possibly mixed with soda, which was the recommendation, to mix it with soda or seltzer water as a beverage. That concludes our program for today. I'm Liz Davey. This has been A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, and today we've talked mostly about apples.